Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Started for all the online viewers. It's my pleasure today to host Ian Smith and Sonny Consalvo from Intel Research in Seattle. They're here to talk about their social mobile applications and not only what they've been doing in the area of privacy, but what they intend to do in the future. Both of them are senior researchers at Intel Research. Ian got his PhD at Georgia Tech and then worked at Park for a stint, and Sonny is currently getting her PhD at the iSchool at the University of Washington. So let's welcome them, and I'm looking forward to hear what they have to say.
Yeah, I'm the tall one. So I guess I should go back. This talk has been through a few revisions. The city in Nevada thing, you will see a few mistakes about American geography that I made when I was naming some projects and was absolutely convinced about what the capital of Nevada was and things of that nature. Also, we have a huge laundry list here of collaborators, and this is not even complete. These are the people that we felt we couldn't possibly leave off the slide. There are many others. At a variety of institutions, Intel has its LabNet model, which I'm not going to bore you with again, but yeah, we collaborate with a lot of people. And if you don't know, IRC is Intel Research Cambridge. I expect most of you can expand the rest of the acronyms. So I need to tell you where this project sort of came from. And we have a project in the lab called PlaceLab, which is a fairly, fairly big project by our standards, perhaps not by yours, but with several people working on it. But what PlaceLab is a beacon-based location system. And most of you, I'm sure, are probably busily typing on your laptops right now, and it's www.placelab.org. And you can grab all the publications and that sort of thing. There's a sort of fairly complete paper about PlaceLab. It's about to come out in Pervasive in May. But the basic trick is really, really simple, the way PlaceLab works. It's, if you know where a bunch of radio beacons are in the environment and you know which ones you can hear, you can work out where you are. Right? And the details of how to do this are a bit more complicated than that, but you can think of just saying, I'm kind of in between the set of beacons that I can hear. That's sort of how PlaceLab works. We work in a UBAComp lab, so place and location are really, really important ideas. And you're going to see them throughout this talk. We're going to be talking a lot about place and location. But it works on a lot of different kinds of radios. So as I said, PlaceLab works by this triangulation scheme. And I'm sure most of you can probably work out in your head that that's a sensible thing to do with Wi-Fi. We can actually do it on a variety of different techniques, including GSM cell beacons, Bluetooth. Does anybody here have a Bluetooth device that doesn't move? No? OK. So that's not a particularly interesting thing because there aren't very many. But if you had a bunch of Bluetooth beacons, say, scattered around your building, we can do the same trick with Bluetooth beacons. And from a privacy standpoint, which you saw in our title, PlaceLab is very careful. And at least gives you a solid base of privacy to work on in the sense that it calculates everything on your device. So PlaceLab does not require you to have an infrastructure provider that knows where you are. The PlaceLab authors, including me, do not know where you are when you're using it. It triangulates your location on your device. Now, as you're going to see in this talk, most of the time, what you want to do with your location is talk to somebody else about it, which will, in fact, allow you to disclose your private information. But that's your choice. The PlaceLab infrastructure at least gives you a chance to do things that are privacy observant because we do the calculation locally. So we're going to talk a lot about social applications, but there's some other things you can do locally on the device. The simplest one is the sort of thing that most GPS units are used for, which is wayfinding, which is, I'm here, I need to get somewhere else, give me directions. An application using PlaceLab, or for that matter GPS, can actually do this without talking to anyone. You can just listen to the environment and calculate that sort of information. But most of the things that Sonny and I are interested in are not of that form. They're social applications. So in particular, we're interested in social mobile applications. So what's a social mobile app? This is actually one of these definitions that I always find. What's a social mobile application? Is my usual answer. But sort of historically, every time someone's invented a communication technology, people quickly adopt it as a social technology. So telephony, email, IM, I would argue postcards are a social technology. I mean, I don't know how many of you actually send postcards, but it's always interesting that the postcards usually say thinking of you or something on the front, or that's the kind of thing you write. But actually, that has nothing to do. The point is so the other person thinks about you, because you're the one on the beach in the Mediterranean, and you want to make sure they know about it. But anyway, that's a different problem. As people get more and more mobile devices, these sort of applications are going mobile. Oh, I have to go my first prop here. I have this device is my mobile phone. I don't know. I assume most of you have probably seen these. These are Sidekicks, which you can get for minus $50 on Amazon at the moment. It's a little tiny device. It's this big. It has always-on IM, always-on email, and it's pretty small. You put it in your pocket, and you're ready to go. Right? So this is I'm using these technologies in a social mobile way. Sometimes I don't use them as socially as I should, but that's a different thing. So there's IM to phone gateways. How many of you people know about the Love Getty? I assume many of you do. OK, so it was a little device, if you haven't seen it, which was in Japan, which you carried around with you and was a sort of matchmaker for people who were nearby. There's also applications that are appearing, especially in dense metropolitan areas like Socialite, which is a way, it's a startup in New York that does a sort of ability to tap your friend on the shoulder, sort of virtually, when you're not physically co-present, when you're both moving around. Also, there's an application called Dodgeball, which is very popular in New York. Apparently went through quite the rise and fall in San Francisco recently. And anyway, it's got about 15,000 users, and it's a way that you can find out where your friends are. Right? So in New York, this is actually quite relevant, that basically you can say, I'm at CBGB's, and you tell the system that, it looks up where all your friends are and tells you when your friends are nearby. So it can sort of do this sort of physical matchmaking for people in a mobile world. And I have actually seen this application in use, and it is amazing the way people use it. I mean, they move totally dynamically based on what Dodgeball says is going on. I was actually with some Dodgeball people, as an example, and they were getting constant streams of information about where people were that were nearby, and they would go from this bar to the next bar to some music venue to some trivia place based on sort of this information they're getting dynamically. And almost all of this is, you might argue, of no sort of economic value other than maybe to bar owners. Right? I mean, this is a social application. This is about meeting your friends on the street. So there's also the opposite side of this, which is solitude. So if you think about this, this is interesting that Dodgeball actually offers you the ability to spy on other people without telling Dodgeball where you are. Right? You can get information from Dodgeball. You can actually, there's an explicit way to say, I want to get other people's information without giving up mine. Right? And interestingly, the reason this was put in, besides the obvious sort of voyeurism, is people want solitude sometimes. Sometimes they actually, even though they're out in the world, they want to be left alone. So we're going to see throughout our talk that we're going to be talking a lot about social mobile applications and sort of its respect for solitude and privacy. And it's worth at this point sort of saying that most of the time when we're talking about privacy, we mean other people not knowing your location. Most of that is sort of a privacy versus publicity thing. There's also the other kind of privacy, which is solitude, which is the right to be left alone. And interestingly, our court system in the US, if you're interested, has spent a lot more time with decisions about solitude than it has about the other kind. So I just thought random legal reference. So what have we been doing? It looks like we're doing something. I just sit at my desk all day and stuff happens. I don't actually do anything. But we've done a variety of different studies, and we're going to talk about these in turn. This first study is what Sunny ran mostly last summer, but starting a little bit before that with a really terrific grad student, Tara Matthews, who is that already confirmed? So you will all get to meet Tara. She's really, really fantastic. And we're only mildly bitter that she's coming here rather than coming back. So there was a study that we did about location privacy and about how and what people want to disclose and to whom. We did another study of an application called Reno that I'll talk about, and I brought some props for that. And we did a pervasive paper about sort of a friendly deployment with about 8 people. Then we have just recently completed a deployment with some people with Seattle families to try to get at some more of the sort of privacy and sort of applications of social mobility. There's currently an application, a study going on right now about sort of place discrimination. I'll talk just briefly about that. And I'll also talk a little bit about what our future work is with fitness and social mobility. And if I get a chance, I'll throw in some gaming stuff because I think that's a lot of fun. This talk is relatively Gaussian. It's much more focused on the middle, so the stuff at the ends here is going to probably get a little bit less. It's sort of a Gaussian with a very long tail on the front. So with that, I believe I'm going to let Sunny go.
So as Ian mentioned, Tara Matthews and I ran a study over summer, and that's what I'm going to talk about. We're going to be presenting it in all of its glory at CHI this year.
Actually, Sunny's being modest is currently up for Best Paper Award at CHI, and that has not been decided. Just letting you know.
Fingers crossed. So anyway, let's imagine that it's a time in the not-too-distant future. It's 7 p.m. on a Saturday, and you get this interruption on your cell phone from your boss wanting to know where you are. Well, how are you going to respond to something like that? Or maybe it's 3 p.m. on a Tuesday. You know, you're supposed to be at work, but you ducked out to run some errands. How are you going to reply then? So what we know is that technologies that are going to allow these things to happen are coming. They're already here with some E911, which is going to allow, by end of this year, cell phone providers to be able to locate your cell phone within about 50 meters in most places. And we're also seeing it with M-Mode. Does anyone know what M-Mode is? Heard of M-Mode? So we found that every time, we can never figure out the menu system to get it back. But there is a way, in fact, that AT&T, now Singular, offers you to query someone else's location. And if they choose to respond, it usually gives you the nearest cross streets where they are. Depending on the cell tower and coverage, it's more or less accurate. It's, in theory, popular, but I don't know anybody who's been able to show me navigate their menu system. And last time I tried, I went to the website to figure it out, and the instructions are actually old. They talk about a past menu system, so I can't figure it out. But I have a high bar for design. So anyway, while these things are exciting, they're going to come at a cost, because while it's valuable to disclose your location, it can be risky. There are times when you don't want someone else to know where you are, and there are times you don't want someone else to know that you don't want them to know where you are. So how are we going to help you manage such a trade-off? Well, we decided to tackle this head-on in a formative study over summer, where we wanted to look at using a variety of techniques to figure out how this would happen. So most of the previous work we saw was all done on recall-based survey techniques that happened at a lab, or maybe was a survey passed out by email. And what a lot of people complained about was people weren't able to make these decisions because they were out of context. We don't really know how they would want to respond to things. So we decided to approach it a variety of ways. And we started with some semi-structured interviews, and people did all of these questionnaires and exercises. We had them build out their social networks for us, so we understood who the players in their lives were and how important these people were and what roles they played. And then we're actually able to take that social network data and use it in something called experience sampling method. Does anyone know what experience sampling is? So good. A large number of people. So for those of you who don't, essentially what you do is interrupt people frequently throughout the day, and you ask them questions about what's going on right now. You don't want to ask too far in the past, or else you're going to introduce recall bias. So you're trying to get as close as you can to how they would actually respond to something. And it's a technique that came out of psychology. It's often used for drug withdrawal. You know, do you want your heroin now, or something like that. And we're trying to use it for Ubicomp and building new technologies. So what we did was we had some code that runs on Palm Pilots to do experience sampling method. And we added a way to introduce variables into the questions so that we could ask about each participant could be asked about specific names within their social network. So rather than having to ask them generic question like, what would you tell a coworker right now if they wanted to know your location? I could ask Ian what he would tell me or Anthony, and he might respond to those things differently. So we were able to get at those meaningful responses. And then also we followed up about why they answered the way they did, what they wanted to share. So we were able to get a lot of rich data about how they would respond in the situation, why, and what the ramifications were if the system behaved differently than they would have liked. And then they also completed a nightly voicemail diary for 2 weeks that told us if they went any place unusual, because we were wondering where they went. If it was someplace new or exciting, did that mean they were more or less likely to disclose in this strange place? On the one hand, you could say, a strange place. It's no harm in giving that out because you're not going to be there again. So you know, how hard is it going to be for somebody to find you? Or you could say you don't want people to know that you've gone to some strange place. So we didn't know, and we wanted to find out. So anyway, all of this was conducted over a 2-week period. That was the experience sampling method, and voicemail diary was over 2 weeks, and the interviews and exercises were on either side of that. With 16 people in the Seattle area. We had an even gender split. People were aged 24 to 64. They all regularly used cell phones and got out of the house with regular frequency. They all had non-technical careers. We specifically screened people like ourselves out. and most were full-time, and several were either married or in some sort of a serious relationship, which does come into play later. So some of the big results we found was, first of all, people were willing to disclose their location at some level about 77% of the time. So of the requests, there were about 4,000, or close to 4,000 that the people answered. Each participant received 10 questions per day, or 10 questionnaires per day. There were several questions per questionnaire in the experience sampling method, and we had a response rate of about 95%. So we sampled people throughout the day.
Disclose their location needs. Like if you were to call me and say, where are you? I would say at work, right? And I've disclosed my location.
Yes.
Is that what you mean in this context?
I will explain. Thank you.
We are not paying this
Thank
guy.
you.
He is not a plant. This is a good question, and we will come back to it.
Well, we'll address it right now. So disclosing something meant that they were willing to give up something about their location as opposed to giving up nothing about their location, and something they were able to choose from a list of what type of thing they would be able to respond to. And work was one of the things. The actual address of this building was another thing. The city was another thing they could communicate, the zip code. So they had a long list of different types of granularities of place they would be able to disclose. And yes?
In many cases, you ask people where they are, they say, I'm here. They don't, it doesn't occur to them that the guy at the other end of the phone isn't where they are, right?
Well, so that's why we wanted to make sure we were putting the request as if it came from a specific person. And we did couch all of the questions in the Reno application that Ian's going to talk about. So it was this application where you could request someone else's location. They would receive it like a text message on a phone, so it wasn't a verbal prompt. It was something that would show up, and you could choose whether or not to respond to it. And then you could also ask for their location. So we also said, hey, whose location would you want to ask about right now? So they did know the person. They knew where the person lived because it was a person who was important to them. And yes, they had a variety of choices on how to respond. Does that address the...
Sure.
So anyway, and that's what the fairly specific, less specific, and vague were. So fairly specific was like an address or...
So specifically, it was respond via your app, not respond via any channel that was available.
That's correct.
Okay.
It was a system. You're responding through the system.
Okay.
And so people were not surprisingly most likely to share their information with their spouse or their significant other. They answered yes to 93% of the requests, but as you'll notice, that was not 100%. And so a lot of the reason why was one of the young mothers who was in the study said, you know, I don't want my husband to know when I'm at Baby Gap because he's going to give me a hard time about spending money there. You know, so they don't, or the other guy who said, I told my wife I took the dogs out for exercise and I didn't do it. You know, I didn't want her to know that I was not in fact doing that. So even with the very trusted people in our lives, we don't always want them to know where we are. And there's always the, I told her I left the office 15 minutes ago and I'm still here. And so if I really told her where I was, she would know I in fact had not left the office. So also not surprisingly, they were pretty irritated when they started getting these requests from their manager or boss. They were only willing to share about 34% of the time. Odds were those times were during work hours on a weekday. And when those requests came in after hours or on the weekend, people actually got pretty irritated. These were all hypothetical requests that we just randomly were generating, and people were really mad in a couple of situations. Like, that was so inappropriate. It was Saturday, it was 4, and she has no right to know where I am. And so people really got incited about that. And so the granularity of what they shared, you know, how detailed the information was strongly tied to how close the requester lived to the participant. And that was less about privacy, but more about the fact that if someone lives in Virginia and I tell them that I'm at 1100 Northeast 45th Street in Seattle, they don't know what that means. But if I say Seattle, it means I'm not on vacation, and that's probably what they wanted to know. So that's the blurring. Has anyone heard about blurring as a technique to protect your privacy? And this is disclosing something true but vague. And we did not find people consciously using this to protect privacy, but we did find that they were useful things to share. So it is good to have that available to you. Like I mentioned, a lot of times, the more detailed information is not what the person is after. We had another participant who was on a road trip that went from Canada down to California. And so there were times when she responded Canada, and it wasn't because she didn't want to give up exactly where she was, but she was traveling on the highway and said, well, I'm going to be somewhere else in an hour, so what they need to know is that I'm in the Canada part of the trip. Another kind of fun thing we found was, has anyone heard of the Weston-Harris Privacy Segmentation Index? This categorizes people into a privacy fundamentalist, pragmatist, or unconcerned. So anyway, we gave people the test and categorized them before they actually started excuse me, we did it at the end, but then we looked at their responses to see if there was a correlation in how they would respond based on their privacy classification, and we did not see one. And I would add, we're not very surprised we didn't see it in this study, because this was a study about sharing with your social relations, and the survey is completely based on business and consumer privacy type issues. But in a different study we ran over summer, we also found no correlation to use of grocery store loyalty cards and these categorizations. So I doubt we'll have time at the end, but if we do, we brought the survey. If anyone cares, it's 3 questions, and you can all find out what you are if you're interested. So I think I'll turn it over to Ian now.
Well, we've had enough science. We'll go back to comedy, I guess. So we've written a paper that's going to appear at Pervasive in Munich in, I think, the 8th of May or something like that. So I would strongly encourage you, if you like German beer, to take in that conference and its excellent accommodations. Well, I should probably go back. We should ask, Reno is actually where the horrible mistake about geography was made, the capital of Nevada. And I was absolutely sure the capital of Nevada was not Las Vegas. And everything at Intel, by the way, if you don't know, I assume you guys probably know this, is usually named after places because it's actually easier from a sort of marketing. For various marketing and legal reasons, naming things after places is a good idea. So we do this with many of our projects. And I didn't want to do Las Vegas, and I wanted to do the capital of Nevada, which I got terribly wrong. What's that?
It is Carson City.
It is Carson City, and we had to do a sequel project just so we would have a project named after the capital of Nevada. But it's a social mobile application that Sunny had done the formative work on in the summer, and we decided we were going to try to build this thing and do it in a reasonable way, but we had to have some principles for how we were going to do it. One thing is we wanted to do it on a device that was really ubiquitous. Despite the fact that I work for Intel, and Intel is very, very happy with laptops, laptops are not ubiquitous. People do not carry them absolutely everywhere. We're desperately trying to make little harnesses that you could wear your laptop with, but we're not quite done with that yet. The device should position itself. We're going to be talking a lot about location, and if you remember back to my intro talking about PlaceLab, we want the device to position itself. We want the device to know where it is. And we're going to talk about that. There's a lot of ways you could do that. You could do that with a GPS. I don't know how many of you have seen the GPS phones are pretty popular in Japan. There's also a GPS, which is sort of a fast locking version of GPS, which has a couple of additional benefits, most notably that like when you walk out of a building, it tends to get the lock with satellites much quicker. You could do that. From Sunny's study, we learned that people design their responses for the other person. So I'll use this guy's terrific question. People often want to say symbolic names. They don't want 1100 Northeast 45th Street. They want work. They want home. They don't want 2600 2nd Avenue. Many people that they communicate with would find it fairly useless if I gave you 1100 Northeast 45th, but if I say work, you would go, oh, okay, I kind of know where that is, or something like that. So we wanted to use place instead of location. And we certainly didn't want to make the privacy situation any worse. As I said, we wanted to do things on mobile phones because those are really ubiquitous devices. But for those of you that don't know, GSM phones can be tracked via the cell network. So our sort of harm here, our sort of model here was Google-esque, if that's actually an adjective, which is do no evil, right? Don't make the world any worse in terms of the way the application works. So for example, one of the design things that this led to is our application is actually implemented peer-to-peer. There's no central service that actually tracks where everybody who's using our application works. It's totally done by the phones, and they talk to each other. So that's sort of trying to make the world no worse. So this is a picture. I have a few of these phones over here.
They're big.
They're big.
My biggest complaint.
These are the phones that this runs on, which are these are Nokia 6600s. They're pretty reasonable little platforms. They're not the best thing since sliced bread. They're not terrifically well powered, but they're reasonable things for people to carry around. What are the key things that Reno can do? You can ask someone else where they are. You can tell someone where you are. You can do this either prompted or unprompted when someone else asks you, or you can just tell them. We threw some automatic things in there too. Because the phone knows where it is, we can build something called a waypoint, which is whenever I get home, tell my wife. That's an automatic thing, which we originally called a trigger, but later the waypoint word was a little more satisfying. You can also put someone kind of on your buddy list, and then whenever they ask you, you don't have to interact with the phone. The phone will calculate its best guess of where you are and send it back without any interaction. So the idea is, with that, if you have someone that you trust, they can query your phone. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. In particular, that we had an audit trail that we put in place so that you would know what your phone was doing automatically, even if you didn't interact with it. We also have sort of an inbox sort of model, because I can never get away from doing email research, which is the sort of thing that it's like the SMS inbox. That's sort of the location inbox that says who was asking you for what and what you've told them. And then, as you're going to see, we're going to have this one nastiness, which is teach, which is, you have to tell the phone where the name of the place the first time you go there. Then, as we're going to see, this is going to have a dramatic and somewhat unfortunate effect a little later. So, to give you an idea, this is actually looking at your location inbox here. These names have all been anonymized, and I've been told this is from Friends, and I don't watch Friends. And everyone goes, no, but that could never happen. Wouldn't Ross be telling Phoebe? No, anyway. So I don't know if these names are any good from the standpoint of Friends, but here's a case where Ross is disclosing his location, and yes, this is really ugly because this is the, shall we say, the set of tools that we got from Nokia to build the UI. But this is a disclosure from Ross. If you click on that, it will give you some more details, but this is basically Ross tells you he's at Total Fitness Gym, and this is a query from Phoebe to you, asking you where you are. And yes, we try to get more information crammed on there, and no, you can't do it. It's really hard with Nokia's default UI. But this is an example where you want to tell someone else where you are, and what the system does is it computes sort of the nearby places, and it uses the cellular network and sort of a variant of triangulation. It's actually based on some ideas from John Crumb's work. I'm sure most of you know him. Basically, it gives you a list of places that are sort of nearby. And to give you an idea, I have some graphs that I can bore you with. But the upshot of it is that, with sort of 100 meters separation between the places, we do extremely well. When you start going below 100 meters, we give you lists that look like this because we don't know which of these places you're actually at. We can't get that fine a grain. So this is going to be great when you want to tell someone you're home, because home is probably pretty well separated from other places that you go, at least if you don't live where I do. And you just click on it. So note that this takes away the typing step. If you think about this as a front end to SMS, which is what it is, then this just takes away the typing part. You can now ask somebody with a couple of clicks, and you can tell somebody else where you are with a couple of clicks. And no typing on the phone is required, since the phone can position itself. So, yeah, these, by the way, the people who are getting the thanks here are the undergrads who helped us on this project. And to describe them after this project was one of my coworkers described one of them as bleeding from the ears when this study was done. So they worked extremely hard. Doing a pilot study, usually you do a pilot study because you don't really know what you're doing. So some things, happened. We had 8 users for 5 days, which was a Wednesday to a Sunday. It included a weekend. We did some pre-study questionnaires. We asked them to fill out email diaries every day. We had enormous logs that were kept on the phones of all their activities. They were members of the research team and their families. We have this terrific little graph here which shows you in my color scheme how these people were connected to each other. One of the reasons to do this pilot on people who are members of the research team is what if things go horribly, horribly wrong? Now, we're actually disclosing to both the system and other people fairly private information, about location. You can imagine that bugs in the software or design flaws cause automatic disclosures of locations that are bad. So we felt that sort of eating our own dog food was sort of the best thing to do in the short term. We did another experiment later. We gave everybody Nokia 6600s, which were the phones that you just saw, and we loaded them with their SIM card. So they kept their phone number. They had to carry a different device. And this is kind of a mixed blessing. As Sunny points out, for some people, these phones are too big. And there were people who complained about that. The other interesting thing we got was, if you don't know, Nokias are all software all the way down. So if you do while one semicolon, the phone's phone functionality will lock up. It is not memory protected. It does not have any, and it will just, if you have a bug in your software, you can disable the phone. And there are some mothers with some small children who said, I depend on this phone. This cannot fail. So one of the things that we learned is, the expectations about software that runs on a phone are substantially higher than you might normally expect with sort of research software. So just to give you an idea of what happened in the pilot, this is total disclosures by participant with our people. We had interest varying from quite substantial to almost none with our pilot people. The interesting thing about these giant bars is not that these people were the most excited about the application. What this says is, more or less, they defined waypoints or triggers for places that they went frequently. In other words, you might argue they were able to predict a little bit about where they go, and when the system had an automatic trigger for there, it detected it. Does that make sense? So that's not that this person was the most interested, but rather they, you might say, did the best job of sort of enabling the system to do things automatically.
Was it just triggers, or was it also the automatically reply to someone or anybody?
This version of the software did not have the automatic replies. That was the second version, so I simplified my slides. Yeah, I'm sorry, we're going to have to kill you later for exposing that flaw. Anyway, so what did we learn? So I'm sorry, I only do comedy. So one of the things I want you to think about is the 1960s James Bond films. They're all pretty much the same. It doesn't matter which one you think of. And almost always, Bond is in M's office, and he's getting dressed down for some transgression or another. It's not particularly important which one. And what happens? Miss Moneypenny opens up the door that you always see, this big, heavy wooden door. She opens the door, and what does she say? Who's a good Bond expert? What does Miss Moneypenny interrupt this conversation to say? Well, she says various things, but there's one that's pretty common. Anybody want to guess? Okay, you guys all watch these kind of highbrow films. I'm sorry, I'm embarrassed. Here's the deal. She often says, "It's London calling for you, sir." That's a common one. Why does she say that? I mean, London, even in the 1960s, has 10 million people in it. That's not particularly useful, you'd think, but yet that's what she says. That's what you understand as the viewer to mean, holy crap, somebody important from government is calling. Maybe the prime minister. Right? But why did you get that from? You got it from the symbol saying, "It's London calling for you, sir." A clever observer might also realize that she interrupted a meeting to disclose this information, so she did something quite active. So what we're going to see in these results that we learn quite quickly is that place is kind of a proxy for lots of stuff. When people share context, like the viewer watching a James Bond film, you can get a lot of stuff from place. Right? And Ms. Moneypenny is an example here of this kind of behavior where you tell somebody some place, and what you really mean is, remember all that other stuff we always talk about? Well, this is sort of a marker for that. Okay? So Ms. Moneypenny does this, and I would also point out that Ms. Moneypenny also doesn't say, it's 112 Old Grosvenor Place, Office 47. She doesn't say that either. She's not saying an exact address. She is saying a really general, vague thing, and yet you get the value out of it. So when people have shared context, location turns out to be really, really helpful. Here's an example from one of our subjects about basically another subject told F, I believe here it is. No, this is actually G gets told by F, I'm at SeaTac Airport at 10 o'clock at night. Now, an amazing thing was able to happen, but G, because they knew the context, was able to discover, oh yeah, I remember we talked, they're getting visitors and we want to get together with the visitors. Now, note there was an active thing. It was done at 10 o'clock at night on a Thursday, which is not typical. But all it said was SeaTac Airport. So this is sort of an example of the kind of way people use place to use it as a proxy for context and all kinds of amazing things. These sort of amazing leaps were surprisingly common. From SeaTac Airport to I want to get together with the people who are visiting.
Do we have the merchant mix example?
Don't know if we have that here. Should we tell that story?
I think it's place can also be misinterpreted. So we had the idea where one of the participants disclosed to his spouse that he was at Merchant Mix, and it turns out that there's a bus stop right in front of Merchant Mix, and so he was trying to tell her, I'm on my way home now. And she happens to like a certain dessert that Merchant Mix has, and she interpreted that as, I'm going to stop off and get you some dessert before I come home now. And so he showed up without dessert.
And hilarity did not ensue. Okay. So this is actually.
But the point is, it carries a lot of context, whether or not it's correctly interpreted.
So, automatic disclosures are a two-edged sword. We had some mixed reactions. I don't want to go into a lot of the technical details of this, but we got the dwell time wrong. To be honest with you, we had too many false positives. People were driving by a place that they had a trigger set for, and the phone would sort of decide that it was at the place and then would send something. So we had too many false positives. We got the dwell time wrong. There's manual disclosure has this beautiful property. There's human beings with big brains on each end, right? And people quickly learned that when someone goes to the trouble to tell me, like Miss Moneypenny coming in the office, it's more important than when the phone, which may or may not be correct, telling me something automatic. And people quickly learned this. But this is actually an example where a participant sort of decided that they wrote the trigger in one context and it got interpreted in another. The person basically is saying, it was okay for some colleague of mine to know when I got home from work, because that's sort of what I meant when I put a trigger on my house. But yet, it has this other thing, which is, I went out, what is this? I was out running an errand and returned to the house, and I wasn't comfortable with the colleague knowing that. So automatic disclosure is a really tricky thing to get right. And I think you're going to see in the later study that you could make an argument that it should just be done away with.
Just a quick clarification. So everyone in the system was automatically notified, or could you personalize it?
No, you personalize it, and the way we did this, actually, just as an interesting sort of process thing, is we actually asked everybody for their preferred list of triggers before the study. Then we coded them all into the phones. They were not changeable during the study, during this part of the study. And as you'll see, the second study, we allowed people to change it, and they didn't. So we tried real people because we're not real people in our lab. So we had some actual humans that we recruited for the second one. And this was led by a terrific grad student, Giovanni Iaccello from Georgia Tech, who did an absolutely amazing job. So I'm going to claim all the credit here because he's not here today. So we wanted to know, if you do this with real people, what happens? What are the privacy issues in this kind of social mobile application? And in particular, what helps them manage their location privacy? Is it the buddy list? Is it the fact that there's a specific set of people that I know and trust that helps me manage my privacy? And how is plausible deniability manifested? So I don't know if you've seen the data, but Orange, I believe, the mobile phone company in Europe, did a study that says that 20% of the time, people do not tell the truth when asked where they are on a mobile phone. Okay? They also don't answer phones. Oh, sorry, my phone was off. I didn't get your message. I'm sure you've all heard this one and probably said it yourself, right? Plausible deniability is a really important sort of social slack that is really important to today's society. And we wanted to know, will people mislead other people about their location? Because our application would actually allow you to do this. You could, in fact, say something other than where you were. So we deployed it to 2 families in the Seattle area after enormous amounts of gnashing of teeth and difficulty in recruiting and God knows what all else. Basically, 4 parents, 4 children. We tried to get one friend of each of the children who was not in the same family. So in other words, we'd have sort of both horizontal and vertical power relationships was the intent. We only succeeded with 3 of the 4 children. We wanted to create some privacy tension. You would like to believe that everyone's children are little angels, but in reality, many teenagers are not totally truthful with their parents. I know that will come as a shock. But, so...
They were between 14 and 17.
14 and 17. And the interesting thing was that initially what we really wanted was the 2 families to actually know each other, because we hoped that that would also create some tension. And in fact, we had a lot of trouble with recruiting to actually get that. So it turned out the 2 families, the kids go to the same school, but the 2 families really don't know each other very well. I think it's only fair to claim that in 2 weeks you don't get around too much of the novelty effects. I'd like to say we did, but I'm sure if Nokia did this study, they could do it for a year. 5 people accepted a new phone and number. The interesting thing about that is this is also a class of software expectations. A lot of people are really scared of losing anything about their cell phone. For example, if we gave them their a new phone, they were worried that they wouldn't know how to operate it, especially in a crucial situation. We had people whose businesses actually depended on this phone working properly. So some of them accepted a new phone number. We also had 2 of the kids, I believe 2 of the kids who were mobile phone users but did not own their own. In other words, they knew how to use a mobile phone. They sometimes borrowed one, but they didn't actually own one, so we gave them one.
Yeah, they were pretty excited.
Yeah, they were thrilled. I was going to say, and we did this right before Christmas, and I'm thinking those parents hate us now. But anyway, a lot of people use their existing phones. We stuffed all their contacts onto the SIM cards so that they would get their contact list. 9 of them had the phones, so there were 2 of the kids that didn't. So the technical challenges, uptime, it has to work. I mean, if you're writing software, you just can't, they can't have anything go wrong with a mobile phone. Expectations about mobile phones are shocking. The idea of rebooting a mobile phone, people go, you can reboot a mobile phone? Another thing that was kind of interesting is that their expectations about these phones are such that they don't actually have a mental model that includes getting new software for a mobile phone. Maybe you're people with the sort of Microsoft smartphone type things, but a lot of people in the world don't think of them as things you could get new stuff for. That idea just is quite alien.
They also only like to charge them every 2 or 3 days.
Yeah, and
which can be a
we
problem
burned
if
up
you're using-
battery at a faster rate because our application wasn't very good about that.
I've heard that SMS is not always reliable, which would be beyond the scope of what you could do in software. Were you able to measure that at all, or how much that affected?
Measuring SMS unreliability is not very hard because it happens often.
Right, so like you could have comparing two logs from two devices where one person queried another but the other person didn't get it.
We are in the process of drawing those graphs right now. We're actually drawing a directed graph that shows all the people and all the messages exchanged. We're grinding those numbers, but I don't have it for you right now. So how does the application know the phone's location? You know, I told you this great story at the beginning that PlaceLab triangulates the location. It's all great. Well, this has this one horrible flaw, which is PlaceLab requires you to know where the cell towers are. Right? You can't do triangulation if you don't know where the cell towers are. And we had this risk that people would go places in our study that were important to them that we didn't have the data for. And while we have pretty good maps of Seattle, we don't want to be in a situation where our study is being compromised because the absolutely crucial place of this teenager is not where we have the maps of the location. So we actually adapted an algorithm from Pervasive 04 by a guy called Lassonen, who's a Finn, which basically is a signature-based scheme. So effectively, what it does is when you see a set of cells, you can sort of name it as, I'm at Microsoft Research right now. And the phone goes, well, the set of cells that I've seen recently is kind of this set, so I'll sort of say that's Microsoft Research. And it turns out if you do this a little bit cleverly, we can actually, quite accurately, we actually had literally no problems with the phones being wrong. The phones being wrong when you do this kind of scheme is not bad. There was some other problems, but the phones being wrong were not one of them. So what did we do in terms of data? We did 2 interviews per participant, one at the midweek, between the 2 weeks, one at the end. We also had a training session for each of the participants in groups. We had 4 different interviewers. We did email diaries every other day, which is sort of every 2 days we were asking them questions about their use of the system and those kind of things. That was surprisingly uninformative, I'd have to report. The phones sent us email every 24 hours. And this was actually really helpful in measuring our uptime, so we would know, is the phone actually crashing in some way? So we actually have quite good graphs of that kind of thing. But we know how many queries people sent, all this kind of stuff. So we were getting summary data every 24 hours about how people were using the system, which would really help us when we would go into an interview, because we would say, I can see that you asked so-and-so on this date, because we had that information by the time they came to the office. And so we got to ask fairly detailed questions about actual events which did not require speculation. So we actually had the real events logged. So this is just some basic usage information. This is actually sort of weirdly normalized because the people did not do the study over exactly the same period. So this is sort of numbering the, oh wait, no, this is the other graph, sorry. This is the one by participant number. So this is how many notifications they sent and how many requests they sent. I don't know. Can I say who the participants? I guess I can. The participants. I'm not going to say who they are. I'm trying to say if they're role in the family.
You can say team versus parents.
I can say parents. So these 2 big ones here are actually parents engaging in a behavior that I'll talk about. This is actually basically querying the teens for their location. Is the typical thing that's going on here. Sorry, that's the big queries are. Notification sent is also the parent, I think, trying to feel like they're not being quite as invasive as they are. That's my opinion.
Just to be clear, both the receiver and requester, so everybody involved in this had to have your app installed, right? So if I wanted to do any location integration with people who didn't have your phone and your app, it would not work. Is that correct?
That is not correct, but sadly true.
Okay.
The reality is we built the application using SMS, and we actually told them that it's human readable. So we actually would allow them to do this with other people, and we even built a way that someone who didn't have the application could hit your phone and cause it to run into our application, which is actually the SMS little text message thing, WAY question mark, which is where are you, typically that people use. And we allowed that, nobody used it. So the reality is they only did it with people in the study. I don't actually know why that is. We went to a lot of trouble to tell them about you could use it with other people. They didn't do it.
It was 2 weeks before Christmas. That could have had something to do with it.
And you can make a lot of arguments, but I really thought they would. I thought they would get interested in the idea of location sort of being communicated, and they didn't. And I think I can speculate about why that might be. But we had interest that varied from none to significantly interested. The interesting result that probably none of you would have guessed, at least certainly I wouldn't have guessed, is that teens are less interested than you think And people think of teens, mobile phones, oh, it's going to be a huge smash with the teens. The parents are not going to give a damn. And actually, it was quite the reverse. One of the speculations about teens and why they're not interested is because, you know what? They already are very facile with mobile phones. They already know how to use SMS. All the participants, all the teens.
They all knew how to.
All knew how to use SMS. So what we're offering them is basically a shorthand for typing location queries. So that didn't offer them, in my opinion, as much value as the parents who knew about SMS but didn't know how to use it. So we offered them a significant leg up that they weren't getting otherwise. That's my argument. I don't actually have the proof completely worked out for that. We're working on the numbers right now. Coordination is the main driver for use. I was terrified by these people's lives. I cannot believe the stuff these kids are doing. I mean, I don't know if my memory is that bad, but I really had a lot of free time on my hands when I was a teenager. I was shocked at the number of times where, yeah, I need to pick you up here, so could we coordinate to make sure that you're going to be right here, so when I pick you up and I can take you somewhere else and pick up the other kid? I mean, it was shocking.
They all played soccer.
They all had
physics club, and you name it, they all had their
things
club.
they had to do after school. And so basically one of the interesting things is the kids need this information. They actually want the parents frequently to know where they are, quite truthfully, because they need the parents to pick them up and take them somewhere else. Right? There's a huge incentive for them to be truthful. People want to send a lot more than location. The application gave them the ability to send location. They want to send a bunch of other stuff, and we'll talk a little bit what the implication of that is. They also don't have that many significant places. The places they needed to communicate were surprisingly small in number. I'm actually going to argue that that number that we saw here is actually a little low, because I think the data entry on the phone to sort of name a new place is a sort of significant bar. But still, if this number is not huge, and it might be off by a factor of 2, but it's not off by a factor of 20, right? I mean, they don't need to have an enormous number of places defined. So you could almost ask yourself, why even bother doing location sensing if they only need 6 or 7 places? Just put up a list. I mean, why have the phone do all this work to actually sense the location? We're working on a paper for Ubicomp, so this is just thoughts, not conclusions. Surprisingly, privacy wasn't as big of a deal as we thought. One of the reasons, as I mentioned, is the kids really do want to be truthful surprisingly often, because they need that. They need the parents to shuttle them around. We were actually a little too careful, I think. I think we actually did maybe too good of a job of designing the application to be privacy sensitive. So for example, all the automatic features are off by default. You have to turn them on. We prompted them to. We explained it to them. We gave them documents. We asked them to do questionnaires. They didn't use that very much. The other thing is that it only discloses places you name. So sort of trick one of doing private information is just don't name places to Reno that you don't want someone else to know about. You're pretty well set, right? Which is a beautiful privacy enhancing feature, but doesn't give us studies where people are being dishonest with each other because they just simply don't put them in.
Names are private to each phone, because you need a name common to two people.
Yeah, that is the subject of intense thought right now about how to do sharing. Place name sharing is a lot trickier and deeper issue than you think it is. Oh, at least than I thought it was.
Yeah, we actually
I don't
found
know how deep you think it is, but
in the first study, home, you couldn't throw around the name home unless you knew who it was coming from.
Right.
Or so what we used was Ian's home, Sonny's home.
Right. So we actually did do a little bit of work, but the reality is that this place sharing is a lot more tricky, I think, than I thought it was.
Could a name be given to only one location, or could
No,
you
you call multiple names, and people did.
So can you call it home, as well as your favorite 3 pubs?
Yep.
That's cool.
Yeah, and we allowed you to name it any way you wanted. We didn't do any interpretation of the strings. All we said was, this set of cells has this string binding. So we actually had people, as an interesting aside, who gave a place multiple names because what they wanted was to express what they were doing in that place. So they had a name called making a sandwich, and they had another name called home, because they wanted to be able to say, or eating lunch or something like that.
No, it was making lunch, yeah.
Was it making lunch? So they actually, interestingly, they didn't understand sort of the cell tower algorithm, because obviously making lunch is really not a terrific choice from the standpoint of that. But anyway, the point of the story is people did want to give the places multiple names. And I think we were actually so concerned with people's privacy that we didn't find a lot of tension. I think that's actually a success disaster, you might argue. Because I would love to have had all these terrific examples where kids were trying to say the one thing to the parents, and then other kids, no. We didn't find a whole lot of use for automatic features. the people want to be in control. There were some concerns about power issues. We did have one kid, only one, interestingly, who even mentioned the sort of power relationship with the parents and the parents forcing him to do something or other. Also, people don't get that many messages, even 3 or 4 times a day. I mean, our system was used on average about 2 to 3 times a day per participant, which you might argue is a pretty good success, right? They're using our tool, they like it, but that's not so much that it's a management burden. You know, until you get to 20, 30 messages a day, you don't need automatic stuff. You can handle it. So I think the automatic features, I think, or the jury is at least still out, maybe not used. Also, as you would expect, they don't use auditing, despite the fact that we gave it to them, they never looked at it. That's typical in the security literature, if you will.
So I want to get back to, so if the automatic features are not used, what is the delta that your feature set is providing versus you call me and say where, or you SMS me and say, where are you?
Yeah.
And I just type back at work.
Right.
Or at home or at the pub. So like, I'm trying to figure out, because I think your comment about the teenagers is an interesting one. I'm trying to figure out what was the delta in terms of functionality that they were gaining.
Right, so you could make an argument, which would not be terrifically bad, that this is a really big acceleration for typing on the phone. That's it. It's just SMS with a fancy front end that lets you type a lot faster. Right. It actually has a couple other side effects that we did see in the study. One of them is people use Reno as a sort of lighter version. The kids, believe it or not, use their phones in school when they're not supposed to. So they actually did admit that they liked Reno because it was quick and did not ring the phone on the other end because they assumed that the person on the other end would have it in sort of silent mode.
And in all of the studies, people have talked about times when you would not bother to call somebody because you didn't want to have to engage their attention like that, but you did want to communicate something, particularly with okayness checking. You know, I got there okay.
Right.
Or where are you? You know.
Right.
And they could do that in this lightweight way where they would not have actually made the phone call. And actually, the email diaries and the interviews specifically asked, was there a time when you used this when you would have made a phone call if you hadn't had the feature?
And so the interesting thing is that, maybe it's on my next slide. Hang on one second. I'm going to add, your Delta feature set is on my next slide. Oops, no, it's not. The upshot of it is that, you know, this is a fancy front end to SMS that if you were smart, you would just shove into the SMS system. And then once you get this idea of sort of having these sort of tools, well, why not give them more stuff, like talk about ETA, rather than sort of using Place in this sort of indirect proxy kind of way. Why not just give them what they want?
Activity was huge.
Activity was huge. About half of our disclosures, I didn't mention this, give them the option to disclose an activity instead of a place. At about half the time, they chose to use activity. And again, these are all because they don't want, they're using this as a proxy for something else. And I think if you're smart, you just make SMS have a bunch of these sort of canned setups, you know, where certain people ask you a certain kind of question. It's okay for the system, just pop up a menu and hit me, 2 clicks. The interesting thing is the typing is just a huge, huge put-off. People just really hate T9 or multi-tap. They just really hate it. And the idea of doing it quickly with, in our case, about 2 clicks on the little button was significantly worth something.
And did you see much group communication? Was it always one-on-one, or is it another computer?
This guy, we have to pay this guy. So no, we didn't. And the interesting thing is because we made a privacy decision that it was peer-to-peer, and we didn't give them the option to sort of tell multiple people things.
We did see something kind of fun with one of the parents who was asking, when she couldn't get in touch with her daughter, she would query the friend who the daughter was often with. So that daughter actually had a surprising number of, the friend had a surprising number of responses to her friend's mother.
Yeah, we didn't build a repeater though, which is probably would have been smart in some way. Some kind of place where they could have maintain a list of people to have friends and family and sort of have the ability to broadcast.
You couldn't just enter multiple telephone numbers.
No, because it was really intended to be quick, and we should have also had groups on the phones. But well, it's hindsight is 2020. So yeah.
Focused on Place, though, if you were thinking about this as a front end for SMS, did you probably not see all the interesting uses that they would have used it?
Oh yeah, yeah. I think that they had plenty of uses that they hinted at that we didn't get because we were so focused on location and privacy that I think it's one of those things that you feel dumb in retrospect. But why didn't we give them some of the things they were using location as a proxy for?
We got a little bit of activity in the first study that Tara and I did, which is why there was some of it at all in there. In fact, the most popular way to deny a request was saying, I am busy.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that is people viewed Reno, I think, significantly as an entree to some further communication. They viewed asking people their location, which I have to say was sort of surprising to me. I sort of thought there'd be lots of cases where you didn't need anything other than this sort of ability to communicate this way. But people viewed it as is this a time to engage you? Is it okay for me to call you? That kind of thing. We certainly saw that in some of our qualitative work. Yeah.
An obvious query for people who may be driving is, what is your velocity?
Yeah, which we can actually calculate.
Because if he's over 5 mph, probably not a good time to talk.
Well, the interesting thing about that is that one of the few cases, the few nuggets of someone being a little bit deceptive was someone who actually wanted to say in the car when they weren't quite in the car yet, because the intent was the other person to get the idea to get ready. Right? So that was one of the few cases where the, quote, deception, and that's a pretty weak form of deception, was really just a utilitarian thing. Say I'm in the car so that the other person will get ready for me to pick them up, because I'm not quite in the car yet. So if you'd done that with velocity, you would have lost. You would have lost, yeah.
I don't know if you mentioned that. Caller ID helps me when I pick up the phone to kind of get into the conversation faster, because even before I pick up the phone, I know who it is, and somehow it kind of gets the communication started faster. Have you thought about coupling this with caller ID, kind of at the moment I pick up the phone, that I know who it is and where that person is, that kind of, and for various reasons, from like ice breaking to, hey, I see you are there and there, or stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because I mean, often if I called somebody, that probably, in many cases, might indicate that I want to share something with this person, and then I probably often also wouldn't mind sharing my location with that person.
Yeah, I think it's certainly clear that that sort of functionality is something that's desirable. It's a bit tricky to get right. I don't know if you've seen the studies about caller ID when it was first brought out in the US, but there's actually quite a few details of that have to be done really carefully. The studies of caller ID in the US found varying levels of use, for example, between by number, by household, or by line caller ID. Because when they were trying to think about how to bring out the feature, they didn't know, did you want to do it on a per target basis of your call? Did you want to do it on a per line? Like, this phone in the house always discloses its location, but some other one doesn't? Did you want to do it on a per call basis? So, in fact, if you don't get that right, I think people will actually not, I think people won't like it. And the whole caller ID blocking and the sort of arms race of caller ID is an example that you have to get it right. So yes, we thought about it, and I think well, I don't know how to do it right now. I know it needs to be done, I just don't know how to do it right.
Were there other cases where location was sort of a proxy for social context, like who is my daughter with? I mean, do you think those were features that people would want? Who am I around, or who's together and I'm not there?
I think the teenagers would.
And are there kind of unique privacy issues there?
Well, I was going to say, one of the things that you might argue Bluetooth is not useful for too much, but one of the things it's really good for is person detection, because people have unique mobile phone IDs that would actually, in some reasonable proximity, tell you kind of who's around. So it's clear that that seems like an obvious thing for us to sort of play around with, which is sort of people detection in remote locations. And it's interesting that the teenagers didn't mention too many ideas about sort of hiding stuff from the parents, but that is certainly one that they did mention. I don't know, I can think of one case where certainly that we didn't hear too much about them deceiving, but the sort of idea that I might be somewhere that I'm telling the truth about where I am, but I'm not telling the truth about who I'm with, is sort of an interesting question about sort of tension and sort of managing privacy. Let me just throw these slides up, and I will open the floor up to questions. This is some new work we're doing about sort of the sort of notion of place and sort of what is a place. So we're doing some work on this right now. Sunny and I are doing some user study work, and Jeff Hightower is doing a fantastic job of sort of, how do you decide? I mean, the phones, for example, that run PlaceLab can sort of tell you a latitude and a longitude. And under what circumstances is that useful, and how would one decide that you're at Barnes & Noble? Or how would you decide you're at the Starbucks that's inside Barnes & Noble, which is inside a mall?
Or is U-Village actually what you want to say?
Yeah. So the idea of sort of the technical side of how do you decide what the name of a place is in some kind of pseudo-automatic way, I think is a really fun topic that we're currently working on, and Jeff is leading this effort. I can talk more about it if people want, but I should open the floor to questions since we're already, I believe, 47 seconds too late. Okay, thanks. It's 11:30.
Everybody asks their questions.
I have like a very high level question, like just 10,000 foot perspective on the whole topic. Could it be that we just lie more often than we actually think that we do? I mean, if I ask you, do you lie? I don't know.
Sure.
Like.
Yes, probably.
I think, could it be that just the underlying phenomenon? Could it be that we have very different notions about what we mean with lying, and that we're much more sensitive to when other people give us, like when they kind of tell us about their location, where they're hanging out with stuff like that. Well, we maybe for ourselves feel like it is okay to stretch the truth a little bit, and we have used different terms for that and stuff like. I mean,
we
it looks
rationalize it when we're telling a lie.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. We have a reason why we're doing it. In other cases, we might not understand what that reason is.
This has been studied in the social psychology literature for some of 100 years. Is that a fair statement? So this is a topic of enormous depth that I frankly don't know that much about, but I'm going to speculate anyway. One thing that also you have to be a little careful of with the studies that I should have mentioned this caveat, the studies that we've all done have been self-report. So there's some idea that if you're willing to deceive your spouse, you're almost certainly willing to deceive some bunch of bozos at Intel Research. Right? I mean, that seems very clear. Secondly, and I think more dangerously for our family study, is what kind of family volunteers the whole family to participate in a mobile phone thing at some scientific research lab?
About sharing location.
Is that the kind of family that's going to have a lot of power issues or sort of unresolved things at home? So you sort of have to, I mean, I think our results are pretty good for what they are, but you have to sort of take that as a thing. And we only really had one kid who was a friend of one of the people in the study.
He wouldn't have participated
who would
with his
not have
parents in this
participated if
study.
his parents had been there. So really, I think there's some sort of idea that sort of well-adjusted people are like kind of the subjects that tend to volunteer for Intel Research studies. So I think
or all studies.
So on the other hand, I mean, those were also people who buy technology. So you might argue our results are perfectly fine for those people. So, but it is a little bit tricky to sort of get at under what circumstances people lie, and under what circumstances you can actually measure it. The measuring of lying is well known to be very, very hard.
It would be really interesting to see a little bit more about just the question here about lying. When do you lie? I mean, just as a kind of a pre-study to this, like.
Well, that was an option in our initial study. You could reply with a lie.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I'm just saying, like, overall, it looks like, in a way, these systems make it harder for people to lie in some cases and takes away this opportunity to kind of do that. And it would be, just general thought, it would be super interesting to hear, how, just, like, before you go in and kind of make it harder for people to lie, just learn more about why it's so important for these people. What does it mean for people to be able to lie? What role does it play in their lives? What do they get out of it? And what gets away if they stop having this?
Right. And Giovanni kind of went into this study kind of hoping to find that. I mean, Giovanni has done the sort of digging on the sort of social psychology literature, and
we were able to tell if they responded with something that was not at the top of the suggested list.
Yeah. So we actually had the phones actually logged any case where they responded with the answer that was not the phone's belief about where they were. Okay. And the answer is they didn't do it. Now you can argue that we did all these things right, wrong, or different, but at the end of the day,
we were hoping, but we didn't see it.
We kept looking for that. In fact, the interesting thing was we even mildly confronted people about this. Right? I mean, we actually had the logs. We were in interviews with people, and we were sort of saying, I have this log that suggests that on, this time when you were talking about this person, that, you didn't do that. Oh yeah, the phone didn't give me the right option or something. I mean, we really tried to talk to them about these sort of what few there were. And in fact, there was only a couple. And like I said, one was this mother who wanted to get the kid ready at home and told a lie, in the sense that she wanted to be in the car, not at the office, which is where she really was. I mean, if you call that a lie, that's a sort of pretty broad definition of lie. But it's clear that it's really important on mobile phones. People do it all the time with mobile phones. So, I don't know.
We just need to figure out how to get at it.
I'm not sure how to measure it. Yeah.
So what angle? So you've done the study and I like it. So what do you think are the elements of the location app that will actually be successful, right? Because we've talked about this in the community for years.
Sure.
But in terms of does it have widespread usage, the answer is no. And so I'm kind of curious to get your take of what are the elements that will turn this into, a tool that 500 million people use, or billions of people.
I think there's a couple. I'll throw a couple random suggestions at you. One is the negative case. I don't have a glass-topped house. If there was a killer app for GPS, I would live in a house that had a glass top so that I could get GPS in my house, but I don't. Right? So clearly, already, you could make an argument that people are not sort of jumping at GPS apps other than wayfinding. So that's sort of backing up your statement. I think there's a couple of things. I think the success of Dodgeball, 1,500 people a day, admittedly in a very strange place, the island of Manhattan, in fact, the Lower East Side, that's sort of interesting, right? I think they're onto something. People want to talk to each other about location. I think they want to do it for socializing reasons. I'm actually not as convinced by the coordination stuff, because I think the coordination stuff could probably be handled with relatively simple means, like ETA. If the phone just offered you an option, it calculated your route to where you were going to go, and offered you the ability to tell the person at the other end, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, something like that. Well,
5, 10, 15 minutes of presets, right?
you could have the presets. I was actually going to do something clever, like try to do traffic estimation and all these kind of things. But yeah, you could just have a list, 5, 10, 15, half hour, 1 hour, 2 hours, right? That might be fine.
Stuck in traffic.
But I do believe that socializing is location is like a really key thing. And I think there's a lot of stuff going on with these apps involved with meeting up with people and for socializing reasons that I think may have some legs. That's the only one that I've seen a really compelling argument for. I think our coordination stuff indicates that this is a nice to have. I think people, they use it a couple times a day.
Well, the okayness checking was something
and
that
okayness
has
checking.
been
Did my kid
prevalent
get home from school
all three
okay?
studies.
But again, do you need a fancy location app for that, or can you just put a Bluetooth beacon in an electrical socket, and whenever the phone sees it, it says the kid's at home? Right? Do you need a fancy location system for that? Probably not. Right? I think that the key ones from that are going to be socializing. And particularly in dense areas. I'm not sure in Kansas that location is all that relevant because Kansas is a really big place with really few people.
Yeah, I think you have to really think about times when using the phone is
Are you from Kansas?
inappropriate.
I'm sorry.
My husband.
Oh. So.
The question we keep asking ourselves was, could they have done this almost as easily just with the phone? And so that's, I think, what you have to
Yeah,
get
and I
past
think your
that.
cynicism is well-founded.
No, I'm not being cynical, actually. I'm just trying to find the elements that will actually take this into
Us
the
too.
mainstream.
I want to ask the opposite.
Oh, gaming is actually another one that I think will get some traction. I think physical world gaming that uses mobile phones will get some traction.
I want to ask the opposite question.
Oh, God.
So you've now learned an awful lot about what people want to do with their mobile phones and what they use them for. And maybe this isn't the right answer. So maybe, are there other, have you thought about saying, hey, forget all this place stuff, even though that's, we're in this PlaceLab place.
Kill that project.
Maybe there's something cool like maybe, small vocabulary speech recognition that triggers an SMS message that would work just as well, still be interesting. Maybe you've discovered that people only have, 10 SMS messages they want to send, and we need a better way to shortcut those. Or maybe that interruptibility is the key, and I should have 2 phone numbers so you can call me. And
high priority, low priority phone numbers.
Yeah, what are there features like that you think that you would?
I have pitched an intern project, if it tells you my interest in your first question, which is my intern project is make me a convincing argument that if you made this sort of shortcut for SMS thing quick and easy, that I want something convincing enough that I can go to a business person and say, your SMS traffic will go up 27.2% if you offered the following set of templates. Now, I think it's a little trickier than just shortcuts. I think you've got to get a little bit of context right, but I don't think you need a lot. I think you need a little. So yeah, I think that's an interesting one. In other words, can you just do SMS shortcuts? I think the speech one is interesting. I actually am a little dubious of the speech one because it's visible to other people in your environment. And I think that people like SMS because it's private, particularly teens who don't have as much control over their sort of hearable range as adults do.
Well, and frankly, with the experience sampling method we've done, the reason we've done it on Palm Pilots, we did some toying around with this early on to wonder if we should do audio and let people speak their responses. And most people don't want to do that because they're often interrupted in places where it's inappropriate to speak out loud. But if they have the ability to just kind of, turn to the side and fill a questionnaire out quietly, they can even do it in the movie theater. They can do it here while we're in the middle of a talk. And so that ability to not speak.
So that's 2 of your 3. Well, I'm not sure. I can't remember what the other one was, but that's 2 of them. Yeah, I believe that shortcuts are good. I think speech is a little dodgy.
There are times when it would be appropriate.
What was your third one? You had
some way of having a high priority versus a low priority call.
I don't know. That one would be easy to measure because I think people already do this with the caller ID combined with the ringtones. I think they already use my phone does this. I think people do that already.
Like, for instance, I want to call my wife and...
You want an extra bit to go through the
Well, for instance, I want to ask her, are you okay? But if she's busy or driving or something, then I don't want her to answer.
So you want it to be kind of extra information from your end that gets back stuff without her interacting with it? Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the lack of interaction that we saw story was not too good. I think people like the control. I think you can make sort of arguments to go back to Goffman. I'm going to reference Goffman despite the fact that I don't really understand it. I think you can go back to sort of these ideas that people want to manage their external face pretty strongly. I think you have to do that really well because I think the interesting thing is people want to express things to other people about the way they respond. Example is people who sit on email. This is classic. People who sit on email, because they've written the response, they save it as a draft, they wait till tomorrow, and then they send it. Why do they do that? Because they don't want the other person to think they're at their disposal.
We also had people in the initial study send request denied a lot when they thought a request was inappropriate, as opposed to answering with something like, I am busy.
Yeah. So I think that one is one that interaction, I think you can make an argument that that's a good thing because of cars and driving and sort of safety. But I think you've got to do that really well.
I encourage you guys to look abroad. Like, I moved to India in October, and the cell phone usage there is radically different than it is here. Like, I exchange SMS messages with every person I work with. I mean, and I mean in a very casual sense too. Like, when the plumber or the electrician comes over, the SMS is used to give him my address, and the mobile phone number is exchanged with literally almost every person that you interact with. And what's interesting is the mobile phone has revolutionized the business for people who are providing services to other people, right? Because all of a sudden they're reachable, and you can call them, and they can call you, and the actual volume that, say, a taxi cab driver or a delivery guy can now do, who's making like $90 a month, right? He's gone up by huge amounts. And so I actually think these location services in a business context, for especially those folks, are really interesting.
Yeah, we're highly aware of that. And you know, when you're a really big company that has a huge market share, one of the ways you get bigger is finding places that you can sell stuff to people who don't already have your stuff. So yeah, so this is sort of why Genevieve Bell is doing Inside Asia for us, sort of urban Asia projects and stuff like that. But yeah, and in fact, we've had some volunteers from Finland also who've wanted to repeat our studies with Finnish families. I mean, kids are there issued mobile phones at birth. So, you know, there's a lot of belief that the families treat mobile phones in a very different way than we do in the U.S. In fact, just SMS usage in the U.S. is basically 5 years behind Europe as a general approximation. So yeah, I think that's a good idea, and I'd love for a reason to go to Thailand or to India. I think that'd be great. I think this is worth doing too, and I think one of the things is people are a lot more phone-centric there in these places. This is Genevieve Bell result, it's not mine. You know, people are very, think of the cell phone in a very different way. It sort of is their computational device. They don't sort of associate that as much with PCs, at least from Intel's standpoint. So the idea that they want sort of new stuff on their phones, downloadable stuff, is not alien to them. That's a cool thing. That's standard. You know, look at Korea, where ringtone markets are, you know, billions of dollars, right? So the idea that there are places where, for example, just getting new stuff for your phone is going to be a much more acceptable thing, I think, is those places are good. And I think Europe is at least better than here. Unfortunately, I live in Seattle, so I can only do so much.
There's one anecdotal thing about that, which is I went to a wedding. This is a very funny story. And there was a guy at the wedding who just kept getting Bluetooth viruses that kind of tried to install themselves on the phones, right? So in terms of downloading stuff, there's the negative side. So it's almost, there's danger in going to public places now if you've turned on Bluetooth and have a Nokia phone, because it'll just get infected by all these people around you trying to install an application.
Yeah, I wish I had that problem. That would be so cool to have like more stuff for my phones. So I don't know. We have big piles of those Nokias. So anyway, I should probably wrap it up. I want to make sure that people don't get shortchanged. So.